Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, we cover soybean diseases in the north and how to manage them. Merschman Soft Red Winter Wheat is available now. Hear how to pick the best variety and maximize your yields for your farm. Big news coming out of Brazil this week regarding the current Dicamba label being pulled. Will that indicate change for the Dicamba label in the United States? There will be a surprise in your mailbox this coming week. Watch for it.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars, Turk and Ben. Ben's been in the field as always, and Ben, what are you seeing?
In my trips this week, we're mainly pointed north, and we talked quite a bit extensively, so I don't want to really rehash the white mold conversation that we had last week, but the white mold is present. They obviously had some sort of conducive environment, micro environment, even in those areas that were experienced a little bit drier than normal conditions. So even in the areas where we thought we were in a pretty decent sized drought, there must have either been small amounts of rain right at flowering, first flower time frame where 80% of the field is at R1, or there must have been enough heavy dews. You know, we were talking about inversions and things. So even in a lot of those areas where we weren't expecting to see white mold, we're seeing the white mold pop up. So this is giving us a really good opportunity to figure out which of our varieties are handling it better than others, making sure our scoring's correct in the book. Lots of varietal differences going on out in the field, and guys, our sales managers are working pretty tough right now to make sure that next year's bean placement is the best for that farmer when they're fighting white mold.
Yeah, so just keep in mind on the white mold cycle, if you have it in a field this year and you have a corn rotation, remember 2 years from now to make sure you look for a soybean variety that has good levels of white mold tolerance. In many areas you need brown stem rot too, particularly in the north, so that you can manage that disease. And of course you manage it by wide rows, lower populations too. So, and then you can check your grain sample this fall without even looking at your field, and you'll see the little charcoal pieces, sclerotinia they're called, and they look like mouse turds is what they look like, because it breaks up, it's inside the core of the stem. Yep. And that's how it overwinters in the soil. So I know we have farmers that once they spot those mouse turds in their grain sample, they make a mental note of it, and then they make sure that they always follow a good white mold resistance management, and then also trying to keep the air flowing through their beans. So it is a totally manageable disease, but you got to be proactive in recognizing it.
You have to remember it 2 years from now.
2 years from now if you're in a rotation.
Yep. So I kind of wanted to talk about the big four things to do to manage white mold. If you wanted to watch last week's episode, go ahead and watch last week's episode. Make sure you're choosing soybean varieties that have at least a 7 score, 7 out of 9. Our breeders are really rigorous when it comes to their testing. So a 7, 7.5 is probably the best scores that we got this year. 9's
is rated excellent. 1 would be very poor. So.
Correct. Yep. So soybean selection is absolutely key. Fungicide timing. There are about 4 fungicides that are 2 that are extremely effective, 2 that are probably a little bit less effective and there's probably a whole mash of different fungicides that are out on the market. Crop Protection Network, if you Google Crop Protection Network white mold, it'll come up with the efficacy and the approximate pricing per acre, and I can tell you that the more expensive ones are the effective ones. So right. if you're chasing that acre, make sure that you're going with an expensive fungicide that has good efficacy on it. And then we talk about the 2 cultural practices that are widening the rows, which allows for airflow so that the little fruiting bodies, the little mushrooms that the white mold that the sclerotinia produce, they can't survive with airflow. So they got to have moist, like rainforest style conditions for the mushrooms to appear. And then lastly, we can narrow or lower our population down to leave the canopy open a little bit more so that we don't have this dense, humid canopy underneath the soybean. in between the soybean.
Then there
rows.
is actually a herbicide that has some activity against white mold. It's called Cobra.
Yep.
At lower rates, and I don't know exactly why that works. If it just burns the leaves enough to let more sunlight and dry out. And then keep in mind, white mold is more of a northern disease than it is a southern disease. But we have seen it locally as far south as the Iowa line, and maybe even a little bit into Missouri when you have those wet years. So be on the lookout for it. But Cobra does have a label for white mold on it.
Correct. So we are making soybean selections. We're probably a little bit on the light side in the late group 2s, but we have excellent options in the mid to early group 2s and the late group 1s. We have some excellent options for white mold. Trust me, we will be screening for late group 2s this next coming year. We have a bunch of experimentals that we're looking at, and those numbers, I will do my best to make sure they have high white mold tolerances as we get into the later portion, because I think the inoculum is built up over the past 3 years. We've had such a heavy load of inoculum, the conditions don't have to be perfect to get the disease that we're looking at now. So just make sure that, we are making sure on our end that we have products in the right maturities to make sure that our growers are protected.
And don't forget brown stem rot phytophthora. You got to look at the whole package.
Correct.
Because if you focus just on white mold, you might let the back door open for something else to come in.
Correct. So I also wanted to touch on, it is wheat sales time. So we need to start thinking about our wheat and our rotations this year with the price of wheat and managing the wheat correctly. We've had a lot of growers that had a lot of success with 70, 80, 90 bushel wheat. I've even heard some of the guys, we have a customer over in Illinois that averaged 107 over 3 different varieties this year, Western Illinois. So we need to start thinking about wheat. We have 2 main wheat varieties. We have an ultra early, which is our KD15 line, and we have a Matty 3, which is a medium early. And I get questions on, okay, which variety? These are our 2 new varieties. We have a little bit of carryover Barbie, which is a medium early, but basically everything that I say about the Matty carries over to the Barbie as well. But when people ask me, Ben, what variety do I pick? Well, if your main focus is double crop, we lean towards the KD. If your main focus is high yield potential, we lean towards the Matty. As you travel south, the Matty still works for a double crop because they have a longer growing season, but the KD is really the ultimate option when it comes to double cropping soybeans, because we had growers that had luck that pulled the wheat out of the field in the middle of June. They got their beans planted, the rains came, the beans came up really nicely. Both products have a bulletproof agronomic package. I think the only thing you have to watch out for is the KD15 has a little bit of a weakness when it comes to stripe rust, but that can be easily managed by a fungicide. You need to be scouting around that flag leaf time.
Yeah, and keep in mind stripe rust comes from the south, so many leading indicators are from Arkansas, and if it shows up in Arkansas, be prepared to spray as you move north. But the wheat is a really good crop for many reasons. If you're worried about conservation, you can hold that soil in the fall because you have and wheat is a lot like corn from the standpoint you've got to plant it on time, close to the fly-free date. You can go a little bit before the Hessian fly-free date because we put the heavier load of insecticide on to make sure that you're not getting infected with mites which transfer the barley yellow dwarf mosaic virus or Hessian fly. But getting wheat and corn are very similar to that. They also need all of your phosphate and all of your potash and 25% of your nitrogen put on in the root zone for the wheat. And get that in the fall, because you really want to get a good root establishment, and that's key. And I think wheat can make you a lot of money if you would have a drying bin available and harvest that wheat at, say, 17, 18%. Throw it in your drying bin. Don't fill it full. Fill it partially full, half full. Depends on how much air you got, and blow the air through it. Just air, no gas, no heat. And you can really speed up your double crop planting.
And increase your test weight.
Yep, increase test weight, lower levels of mycotoxin because the product doesn't sit out in the field as long, so you don't have those funguses that you can get docked for. You don't run into, most of the time it seems like we have a little bit of a dry period in the middle of June. And if you have that little bit of dry period, you get the beans put in, and then you catch the late June, early July rains, and you can be extremely successful raising double crop. We even have some guys in Wisconsin trying double crop. So,
well, I think what's changed in wheat, Ben, is the disease packages that we have now. We have genes now for scab resistance, which basically the scab starts and then the plant will arrest it, and and that's a multiple scab genes. We have much better leaf, powdery mildew, rust, stripe rust tolerance. I mean, they always say in sports that it's defense that wins championships. It's the same thing in wheat. You've got to have really good defensive products, and then of course the fungicides now. The fungicides that we have today, if you apply a foliar fungicide, oh my gosh, your test weight goes up, your grain size goes up. I mean, we didn't have that 10 years ago. I mean, so if you haven't planted wheat in the past, think about it. Now, what about farmers that don't have a drill? Believe it or not, you can plant your wheat in 15-inch rows, and it'll do quite well too. Maybe not quite as good as if you have it in a 7 or 10, but you can use your soybean planter, corn, and plant in 15-inch rows. We got more and more farmers planting in 15-inch rows as their drills wear out.
Yep. And you can even do things. I've seen guys cross hatch fields. I've seen guys go back and split them again if they feel like the 15-inch rows is really worth it. But there's definitely, you are correct. All that you have to do is get a back cover plate and the right meter. And there's a lot of guys that plant wheat in 15s with Kinsey planters.
So the other thing too to keep in mind is population. Talk about population on wheat.
Yep. So we have typically fallen in the middle of 1.5 million seeds per acre is the population that we are shooting for. So if you take your seed size and you take 1.5 million divided by your seed size, that gives you how many pounds per acre that you need to be planting. So that 1.5 is kind of the minimum that I want to see on sandy ground, especially as we get more productive. It's kind of like soybeans. We can lower that population a little bit, but there's a little bit of research that one of our wheat, there's a little bit of information that one of a trusted advisor of ours has had that even if you get into that 1.8 million seeds per acre, you have more main tillers, and the more main tillers you have, you can get increased yield from having that heavier seeding rate. So 1.5 cuts it right down the middle. I've seen guys raise extremely high yielding wheat, but you really want to make sure that you have enough plants out there, because if you just have the drill set for 90 pounds per acre, and that's what you've always done with a little bit larger seed size, some years you could be getting way less wheat on, and you're not going to be compensating for the difference.
Yeah, 1 head per square foot is a bushel in wheat. So if you want to raise 100 bushel wheat, you need 100 heads per square foot. And you got to get that with either population or tillering. And population is the easiest way because the main stem will produce the biggest head, and the tillers are always a little bit smaller.
And then the fertility to grow 120 bushel wheat has to be applied as well. You need to be, you can't just go out there and say, well, I got enough fertility out there, whatever I got, the wheat's going to use. If you want to grow high yielding wheat, you have to be fertilizing it for high yielding wheat.
Phosphate's critical in the fall during that. Believe it or not, just like corn, you always heard the saying that corn, the yields are determined early. Same thing with wheat. It's that fall stand and that fall population, and then of course planting 1.5 inches deep is very critical too. You want that crown to develop low enough that it can withstand the heavy coldness, freezing, heaving and stuff. So wheat's a fun crop. I love wheat. I mean, it's there's no tech fees and no licenses required.
Yep.
But wheat today is patented or under a restricted use agreement. You cannot save wheat today. It's no different than soybeans. So it is restricted. So, but we have so many new options coming in the future too, don't we, Ben?
Yep. We're looking at some of the earliest products that are on the market that might even be a touch earlier than the millie. We're looking at some different options for Wisconsin and southern, our southernmost tier for super high yielding, a little bit fuller season wheat. So we got a lot of very interesting things coming out of the wheat lineup, and we have excellent supply. So if we've had issues getting Merschman wheat in the past, it will not happen this year.
Nope, we got great supply, and you have some data too that we're going to post today, don't we?
Yep. So if you're looking for data, it's available on our website. You can see here I have some of the popular standbys that we do. We have testing done through tech services, and we run 3 locations, 5 reps per location. We had a very strong wheat year this year. I also highlighted that our test weights are exceptional test weights even in a tough year like we had this year with moisture. We're still looking at our Matty 3 60.9 pound test weight. Our KD15 has a 61.7 over those 15 tests. So those numbers are pretty strong when you're looking at the outlying factors. There were some 63, 64 pound test weights rolling out of the KD, and that has to do with that head scab protection. That has to do with managing resistances out in the field.
So take your marginal ground, raise 2 crops, make more money than you did on your best corn ground. So that's the goal.
Yep.
So we'll post that data on this Cup of Joe episode also, so you can take a look at it. Dirk, what's been going on in your world?
Oh, I've been running around the country too. Ben and I both been on the road quite a bit. Crops look really good all across. I was in Boot Hill, Missouri, and all across Illinois, and I didn't see any bad crops anywhere. The Pro Farmer Crop Tour completed this week, and the analysts are saying that Pro Farmer just confirmed what the USDA report was, which was big numbers, and so the market's kind of reacting to that a little bit. We all kind of thought the USDA couldn't be those numbers. We would have a hard time achieving those, but the Pro Farmer Crop Tour just kind of confirmed that they're probably pretty real. So if you have old crop corn in the bin, I wouldn't be sitting around watching it much longer. I don't think we've got much opportunity. You look at the only other option right now. I mean, this crop is getting pretty well made, and the only other option would be is if we would have an early frost scare, and the forecast is not conducive for that either. So I think we're going to switch to a supply side market here very, very shortly. If you got old crop corn sitting in the bin, get it moved. That old crop price and the new crop price are going to come together very rapidly here, because harvest will be starting within 2 weeks in the south. So that's once we get. I mean, it's already going on in Texas. So, but I'm talking about southern Illinois, Tennessee, Arkansas. Harvest is going to start on corn very shortly. I seen a lot of ears shucks were brown on green stalks, so that's how good it is, because when you see green shucks on green stalks, you've got a pretty darn good yield out there.
Yeah, and you went north and you went south, and I was up in the Des Moines area, and I saw good crops all the way up there from between West Point and Des Moines. So even though we've been on the dry side, miraculously looks like we're gonna have some. If you have the stand and you've done your due diligence with managing the nitrogen, and we could have some really nice yields.
The drought monitor actually continued to show additional dryness in some of the major crop producing areas, and but again, it's that additional dryness is probably not going to have a major impact on yields because we're pretty well made.
Yeah, Elwin Taylor, the Iowa State professor, always said, we could have creeks dry, rivers down, and have a record corn crop, because the only thing that goes in creeks and rivers is the excess moisture. Mm-hmm. And so that might be one of those years. The real worry is next year then.
Is next year, that's right. We'll be switching to new crop 2023 very shortly.
So what what else do you have, Turt?
Well, there's a couple things here. You sent out an article from South America that was a Reuters ad or bulletin or news release.
Yes, it was about the Dicamba soybean from Monsanto Bayer, and basically they just received label on a product that has the Dicamba resistance and Roundup resistance and Liberty resistance, and also a BT for Lepidopteran, the caterpillar type insects that they have so much trouble with. And they had last year it was experimental, and they had like 5,000 acres of it. And this year's full blown, because they'll be planting here shortly. And when we're harvesting, they're planting. But what struck us as unusual was that they've pulled back on the registration to be that Dicamba can only be a pre-emerge only up until the day of emergence, no post.
Now they got approval for post early on in the registration, didn't they?
That's what I understand, and they've pulled that back now till they want it as pre-emerge only. So is that a premonition of what's going to happen in the United States, or why did they do this? I don't know. I mean, we're not experts on that particular product, but we just noticed the news release, and we will post it so you can read it yourself and determine what you think of it. But obviously some things are changing, so we're just advising farmers, hey, if it happened in South America, they're not going to use it as a post. Would that be possible that would be something that come into play? And of course, the EPA, you got some other articles to say the EPA is doing different things too now than what they've done in the past. So
I think a bear must be listening to Cup of Joe. We talked about this a while back, and what would be required for this to be able to us to all live together, and pre-emergence only was one of the things that we talked about.
Turk, I wish that was true. But anyhow, it is true that if we would go to a pre-emerge only, and that would be before the trees would be, the leaves would be out, and the soybeans, we would all coexist much better with Dicamba.
It would help a lot.
It would help a lot. So we can keep our fingers crossed.
So EPA also this week, Joe, banned chlorpyrifos.
Well, what's the common trade name for that?
Lorsban.
Lorsban, Dursban, and Dow. It's a Dow product or Dow label, or they're one of the manufacturers of it, and they actually banned it earlier, said that they weren't going to produce it more, but it was a lot of other trade names were going to continue with it, and the Trump administration extended the label so it could be used, but the Biden administration, undoing Trump things, actually took it back off the market. So maybe there's more to come on changes that Trump made for dicamba as well.
Well, there's no question about it. Every herbicide out there is going to be scrutinized. I don't care which side of the fence you're on, it's going to be scrutinized. And we have to be very careful and diligent in that we don't take away all our tools to produce high quality food and fiber and fuel. Well, I wanted to mention that if you are a 250 acre soybean farmer and above, you will be receiving our seed guide in the mail in the next few days. This past week, we've been very busy here at the office sending that out. So this is our latest seed guide. It's going to come in your mailbox, so watch for it. And again, our dealers have their pricing, and they're ready to take your early order. And why would you order this early? To get exactly what you want. That's the number one reason, and also to save money. I always tell farmers, the only reason you wait to buy seed is because you want to pay more. So we're trying to save you some money too. So that brings us to the corny jokes, and I'm not sure which one I'm going to lead with first, but let's do this one first, okay? Turk, did you hear there was a kidnapping at the school today? It was no big deal. He finally woke up.
Okay.
Now, Ben, this one here fits your personality perfectly. Ben's a pretty modest, not somebody that likes to toot his own horn and everything, So he reminds me of this corn plant, What did the corn plant say when it got a really high compliment? What did the corn plant say when it got a really high compliment? Aw, shucks. Like, that will almost deserve a laugh, didn't it? Aw, shucks, that's Ben, Anyhow, enough for this week. We thank you for your business. We hope you and your family are safe, and we'll see you next week. Take care.